So this is all about AEEWI Western India chapter. And now let me introduce to today's speaker. So today's speaker is Chandana Sasidharan. She is expert consultant working on the energy transition. She is energy technology specialist with the USAID South Asian Initiative Regional Energy Partnership. She is working on decarbonization challenges in buildings, transport, and power sector. Her research is focusing on synergies from sector coupling of energy efficiency, electric mobility, renewable energy, and energy storage. She is certified measurement and verification professional with expertise in energy modeling and simulation studies. She transformed her career from petrochemical industry to clean energy sector. She is transport electrification expert consultant with many publications focused on Indian EV market. She is Masters in Renewable Energy Engineering and Management from Terry School of Advanced Studies, New Delhi. She is active as climate ambassador, woman in energy champion, and mentor to many clean tech startups. And today she will be speaking on handling India's energy rising energy demand. So over to you, Chandana. Welcome to AEEWI Western India chapter. And we hope to have a very interactive session with you on this forum.
All right. Thank you, Bhavna. Thank you for having me over. In fact, I started my career with Reliance, and then I worked for a long time in Maharashtra and Gujarat. So it's very happy that I am here. I'm sharing my entire screen so that we can go to the deck that I have. So a larger part of the problem that I try to solve every day when I work is there is of course an easier path, right? But of course a different path is actually complex, but the right path is slightly tricky. A lot of the work that I do right now is mostly focused on that. So I put an image which makes a lot of sense to me on how do you actually handle India's future energy demand. In this particular piece, the challenge is when you say increasing demand, everybody looks at it as a problem. And the way that my work goes is to see, is it actually a solution? So that's the piece of work that I do. Setting the context, we all know that the electricity system is changing. So when we studied, it is about power plants which are far away, huge capacity transmission line which carry electricity over long distances, and then you get into the distribution at the household level. When I can divide the system into what is the bulk power system and the distribution system, a lot of changes are happening in the bulk power system. A lot of changes are happening in the distribution system also. In the changes in the distribution system, we see a lot of adoption of what is called as a distributed sources, solar, storage, flexible load. This could be a smart air conditioner, a grid interactive building, and an electric vehicle, making the consumer a non-passive participant. So the consumer is able to generate their own electricity. They can increase or decrease their demand, and they can even store electricity for a later usage. In this context is when we think about where demand load is becoming more flexible and generation is becoming renewable, and how do we manage the show? I also want to make this connotation on the way the things are changing. Typically, when I started my career also, your window is focused on simply reliability. You are thinking about all the incidents which has very high frequency or occurrence, and the impact would be on a low or a medium scale. Whereas when I think about climate vulnerability, or resilience perspective, you're talking about incidents which have very, very high impact and very, very low probability of happening. For example, the pandemic that happened, the way it changed our lives, this was something we didn't anticipate to happen. So your window of thinking has moved from simply reliability and stability to resilience and flexibility, the ability to adapt, the ability to match with renewables, the ability to change according to the situation. And this is my larger piece. When I think of energy on electricity, everybody is very happy in understanding electricity or energy in terms of kilowatt hour and kilowatt. We could even go to, okay, the reactive active bit, all of that. Then again, the time value gets significant when I want to manage a grid. I'm also concerned about how fast I can ramp up generation or ramp up demand, ramp down generation and ramp up demand. So energy in general, if I think about it, it is not just about how much volume I have. It's also about the when and where aspect of it. Where do I need the energy? Do I need it in the Western grid or do I need it in the Northern grid? So these are important, and what time do you need it? And all of these dimensions when it comes to electricity is currently being translated in the way the electricity market is being structured into energy, capacity, and ancillary market. And we see the transition happening in India also. So the whole theme of where my work fits is in this. You see adoption of digital technologies. You see that there is distributed generation coming up. You see grid interactive buildings coming up. You see that you are decarbonizing by way of electrification. You are decarbonizing heating in industries. You are electrifying vehicles. So transport is being electrified. You're also fitting in hydrogen into the mix, how hydrogen will play a role. And then on the larger game of the market being liberalized and the communities become critical in this equation, is the whole transition happening. And everybody's goal is very much to get electricity affordable, reliable, and sustainable. That's a challenge that we try to solve. And what is it that I want to talk about? I want to talk about demand flexibility. How do I explain demand flexibility in one go? In simple terms, demand flexibility is what could be considered as the ultimate revolution that has happened in the demand response space, which happened with some, direct control thermostats and switches to what is possible within this span of 30-35 years or so. So what has happened? Earlier, your generation was very stable. You were not thinking that your generation needs to be, need to be too flexible to manage demand. That's the intent that you have. Now you have a lot of solar and wind sources, which are very clean in nature, but because of the nature of the beast, it is slightly tricky to manage. You can't manage a solar power plant the way you would manage a thermal power plant or a hydropower plant. On the other end of things, what is happening is you have a lot of controllable loads coming in. This could be EV, this could be cooling load, and a lot of loads are coming in from the decarbonization perspective. That is what we call sector coupling. Earlier, there was no linkage between electricity sector and transport sector because the transport sector was dependent on petrol, and that was taking a different curve entirely. Now that is not the case. Now, as electric buses are playing, as electric two-wheelers are coming, electric e-rickshaw autos are coming, the electricity sector, and traditionally a sector which was not linked into it, is getting coupled. Then you need to think very innovatively. You need to think of the technology and the infrastructure. You need to think of how the market would be designed, what the regulations would be. You need to really think about the business model. And finally, how the system will operate. That is the space of the systemic innovation that you have in the space. And this is the space where the flexibility comes in. So it's not just about switching off a light. It is not just about switching off a fan. it is not just about installing a BLDC fan. It's actually, it becomes slightly a wider canvas. And that's what I'm saying. So when I say DSM in India, people pretty much associate it with, oh, load shedding. Because our challenge was different earlier, right? Our challenge was we did not have adequate supply. And then you had to curtail demand. So it was all you were thinking about was curtailment. Now that's not the window that you have to think of. You talk about shift. You have a surplus power region. Where you are from Maharashtra, you can actually see this in transition where the agricultural load, which was earlier a load which you would give supply to during an off-peak night time, to a high RE power time, shift during a surplus renewable time. And one other thing you would want to do is when you have renewables, you see when the renewable power is higher, the thermal power has to go low. So you always also want to mitigate the ramping up that you need from the thermal power. So you do shift the load. So it's not just about curtailment anymore. And then you have two other larger pieces also. How can you induce behavioral change? And how can that actually change the way people operate their devices? That's a larger piece. And the end piece is very interesting. So shimmy is basically a dance form. Everybody knows that. So shimmy is a fast dance form, right? So shimmy is about how do you use demand as a resource to smoothen, to provide support frequency, because these are very critical when you operate with variable resources. Because when a cloud cover comes, the complete solar generation gets disrupted. So you need fast response. If an EV is connected and it's controllable, that's a fast response I can provide. And of course, the scale of where you need the response depends on, your location. Am I solving the problem based out of a pocket in Delhi? Or am I solving the problem for the northern grid? Or am I actually solving the problem for the whole of India? So all of these factors affect. And there are, in the way the power system is defined, you also see there are control areas within which some resources could be aggregated, and you could achieve the same result that you earlier you had to derive from generation. And so what is it that you're trying to achieve? Earlier, when I say demand response or demand everything, it's all about peak load. It's all about how there are very certain pockets of peak demand that will happen less than 10% or even 1% of a year. But because of that, I have to spend too much. So that's what I'm trying to avoid. Now your dimension has increased. You talk about, hey, can I increase consumption when I have a higher RE? This is actually happening in the southern grid right now. In the southern grid, when the monsoon comes in, you have a lot of wind, you have adequate solar, and then you are facing curtailment of RE. Whereas if you could have increased your consumption, this could be by shifting the agricultural demand during the daytime. That's definitely a case for it. Can you provide a capacity reserve? So to cater to the peak load, you have to build a lot of power plants. You have to build a lot of transmission line. You have to upgrade the capacity of transformers, which remain underloaded for the rest of the year. That's the piece where you're at. So how do you prevent that? Can you actually provide balancing services, frequency support services to the grid? And ultimately, this is the reality of us, because none of us know when an emergency could happen. This could be a climate-centric emergency. This could be surrounded by other things also. Can you actually prevent a blackout? That's the ultimate piece where the demand flexibility should think. So you see how you are moving away from what would reduce my electricity bill to how do I help the country and how do I help the system. So your ambit is actually quite wide, and you can see of mapping on how the different types of reserve will fit into different types of resources. And on the larger piece, as I try to explain, it's not just about controlling a light. It's about more. It's about installing a rooftop solar plant also. It's about me adding an energy storage at my home. This could be thermal storage also. It's about how I could have a microgrid that could support a community when it's vulnerable. This could be connecting water heaters together to form a virtual power plant. This could be about electric vehicles. This could be about how the new buildings that are yet to come in India being grid interactive. So it's about a larger piece of resources, which is not just demand now. It is demand, it is generation, it is storage, which is all getting clubbed at the discom end. And how do you effectively utilize it? This is the piece of the puzzle that I try to solve, because the other pieces of the puzzle, for example, you have a megawatt or a gigawatt scale factory, which is connected at intrastate transmission level, and SLDC, or the state load dispatch center or the regional load dispatch center, actually has the visibility of it and they can control it. That is easier. That is still easier part of the puzzle. Whereas looking at the distribution, which is the challenge, which is basically, the hard space, the world, how do you fit this problem? I think this is the trickier part of the puzzle. And that is where a lot of my research efforts go. To make the story simpler, what is it that we have to do? Let's take the case of residential. Typically, nobody was interested at residential, but now we are recognizing residential load is becoming very critical. And so what do you try to do? You try to have an uncontrolled load profile. Then what you try to do is, you see this matching happening with RE also. So you see when my supply is available more, and I try to fit whatever load I could move to that. So that's pretty much the puzzle piece that we try to do. And as explained earlier, if I have to solve this as a technology angle, this is business model angle, this is system planning angle, it's a system, complete systemic innovation picture that you have to look into it. Why am I talking about it? If I compare India with Australia, okay, you see the way the Australian market is transitioning, we score fairly okay in a lot of areas, okay? But what are the high risk area for India is that India doesn't have a sense of demand growth or composition. We really still don't understand a plan for the reality of for all our demand growth and what all composition it is coming from. And the missing piece is demand side flexibility. Now you look at how the system changes. When I go to 20, 29 or 30, the peak demand day is going to look very different. Even on the peak demand day, I'm going to have a lot of solar. I want my thermal power to go low. I'm going to have batteries. I'm going to have pump storage plants and all of that. But I am not just concerned about the peak demand day now. This could happen anywhere from May to June. I'm also curious about what will happen on the maximum wind and solar generation day. What happens on the maximum solar day and what happens on the minimum solar day. What happens on the maximum energy demand day and what happens on the minimum energy demand day. So that's the planning piece that you do have. And you would see the same thought that is being reflected in the way our country's electricity plan is being made. You see, we don't see a lot of demand resources that are being used hereby, even though you see when I read the ancillary service regulation, actually they allow demand participation and storage participation on 1 megawatt into the grid. Now, do you aggregate and provide? Those are, issues you definitely have to solve right now. And it's an ongoing process. Now, if you ask me the question, as in like, hey, we are talking like a lot of things when you say DSM that happens globally. There are a lot of examples. India mein ye sab nahi ho sakta. That's the general attitude that we Indians go with, is like we say India is different, that won't work. But remember this day when our nation's leader told us for COVID, for solidarity, why don't we switch off our lights? We saw this day happening, and we saw that on that day, just from switching off lights, we lost closer to 30 plus kilowatt, and our grid operators could actually manage the show. So what is the test of flexibility of Indian power grid? It has happened. Can behavioral demand, response make an impact in India? Definitely that has happened. Not just that particular day, but If you see the graph that I added on above, that is how the power system operators have managed the show completely through COVID, when all our industries shut down, all the commercial areas shut down, and residential consumption did increase. So we did manage this show. And this particular dip is when we had this particular flexibility test. So we have managed the show really well. So I'm not talking about a far off reality for India. Anyway, you see the generation mix has changed over the years. You see a lot of renewables coming in, and it's not just about how the renewables are coming in. It's also about when the renewables are coming in, I am experiencing a lot of increase in electricity demand. Why? Firstly, I was not a country that was using a lot of electricity to begin with, right? My average per capita electricity consumption was quite low. Now that's not what is happening. Now I am buying more appliances. There is rapid urbanization. There is increase in income. So a lot of air conditioning penetration, if you see, it's not happening in the cities. It's actually happening in the tier 1, tier 2 areas, and on the villages and on the towns. So that's what is happening. And not just that, and add on top to it, I am making things electric. I am electrifying heating. I am electrifying vehicles. I'm also saying from the renewable energy, I will produce green hydrogen. So when I make a bunch out of it from the demand side, I want to see, hey, how much will my buildings take? How much will my transportation take? How much do I need for green hydrogen generation? So that becomes your complete picture to solve. And this is an overview of what actually happened this week. So this is from a carbon tracker website. So it's good that, with all the smart meters and the digital data coming in, we can actually track. So on June 20th, around this time, right, as we are talking, we hit a demand of 214, and relatively, this is the places where all the generation is coming from. And you see how RA generation is happening, increasing over the day. Now you actually have a track of it. This gives you a sense of what is happening, how the generation is happening. If I were to translate it into the peak management problem, see your problem now, if I have to translate, this is a summer, this is this year's summer. If you see, the lowest demand was closer to 120K and the highest demand was 220 plus. And a lot of this demand is happening from cooling. And because we are using our air conditioners, definitely all the central cooling systems are there. So that's a larger piece of where demand is coming from. And cooling demand is critical for India because you're going to see a very high increase in air conditioning demand in India. A lot of people have forecasted this under different reserves also. Now you think of how would you manage your cooling demand. Okay, now the piece about managing the cooling demand is, can you provide thermal comfort and manage cooling demand at the same time? This is very important. This is very integral and very important. Why is it important? Because our thermal comfort levels has also changed. Whereas I'm actually from Kerala, I can relate to this. So when I grew up in Kerala, humidity was actually not a big problem for me. I could handle the humid heat. Now the humid heat has increased, humidity and heat has actually increased, due to climate change. And my ability to my thermal comfort level has also changed because now I'm used to air conditioned working atmospheres. So when I go home, I also demand a similar atmosphere which is close to my thermal comfort. I'm saying a lot of us are not comfortable sitting at 30 degrees in a fans in summers anymore. This is tricky. This is happening to me. So when you design your strategy, it cannot be just one thing. It cannot be one size fits all approach. It has to be a combination of things. It has to be, how do you make your ACs not just efficient but super efficient? How do you induce behavioral change to actually do a temperature setting? Don't set at 16, don't set at 24, 26, 28, whatever it is. How do I get smarter ACs which are cost effective? Do I put a IoT based smart plug to my AC and make it cost effective? Can I actually control the huge chillers? Can I bring in cooling as a service through district cooling? Can I bring in thermal storage? So a lot of the piece is fitting here. And even like as part of my research, we have also seen how much shed you could achieve from, cooling, large scale cooling also. And you can definitely achieve close to 2 or 8, even 8-10 gigawatt of demand shedding from cooling. Now you think again, what is your application for it? Is your application, this is not an everyday thing you're asking people to shut down their cooling demand, right? No, this is very sensitive thing. Are you going to ask it on a critical peak day? Are you going to ask it one off in a year? Or are you going to ask it every day? So if I have to ask it every day, it has to be a behavioral approach. But if I want to ask it on that critical day where the demand is unbearable, unmanageable, then it's going to be a strategy that is towards that. So that's a sense piece where we can definitely work with. We have to understand the diversity in India also. The way the northern grid experiences summer is not the way the western grid experiences summer. So these are pre-COVID numbers. The reason for me having pre-COVID numbers is because I'm also studying what is the impact of COVID that happened in the power grid. Since till I filter it out, I'm going to stick with it. So as you see, when the western grid and the southern grid, the electricity demand is slightly coming down when the monsoon hits. That's a time when the northern grid is experiencing a higher demand. Since I know you, a lot of you, I hope, are from Maharashtra and I'm from Delhi. So let's use Delhi and Maharashtra to present this case, okay? So if you see, Maharashtra is very, very high, right? And Delhi is now close to 8,000 now, okay? It's gone from 7,000 to 8,000. As you see, the red portions are when your power demand is higher. So your demand is higher till June, and it from February to March. Whereas in Delhi, the peaking is happening in the April to August. And you see the difference where in Maharashtra, during April, June, especially from the industrial demand and all, the peak kind of remains throughout. Delhi has an interesting thing where Delhi experiences a very high night peak from the ACs as well as a day peak, especially because Delhi is a heavily residential zone also. So we really have to factor that in. Whereas in the case of Maharashtra, the day peak demand is still the major cause, not that much of the night peak. We don't see that. We actually see it in Delhi, UP, and all of these northern grids. And that this gives you the entire picture. So if I have to solve the problem for Delhi, do I really need to look at winter? No, even though people may use heaters in winter, but if I have to solve the demand management problem of Delhi, I need to target summer. That's what I have to do for Delhi. And if I have to solve a problem for Maharashtra, the strategy cannot be a summer-based strategy, because Maharashtra actually has a high demand in winter also. That gives you the picture, and you can also see how the demand is actually moving day night. What is the variation you are experiencing? Because if you see the case of Delhi, you can see that if I have to solve for Delhi, I cannot just solve the day demand problem. I have to solve the night demand problem. That is definitely there. And in the case of Maharashtra, you would see your largest share of your problem is the day problem. So numbers can actually tell you the story very easily. I have further, because sorry, I like to work with data. So I have further data. I can even, go and see as like when did you hit the peak demand all throughout the day, so that I can actually bring a strategy forward. And for us, I guess the larger piece of solving the demand management puzzle is playing with data and making a case for it. And where do you get a lot of data from? Of course, the smart metering that is happening is your major source of data. Probably a lot of you have already seen this graph on how demand participation would actually happen in the electricity market. So on a larger sense, it starts with the time of use price, and then how demand would respond into day ahead hourly pricing or a critical peak pricing. So we actually tried a demand response with critical peak rebates, which I will actually talk to you about. Now, on the other side of things, on the incentive-based demand response, you have to go segment-wise. There's energy market, there's capacity market, there is the resource market. So we know, like the bidding process has started for demands or anybody to participate in the market-based mechanism to provide ancillary services. So that is actually on the way right now. And at the end of things, there is direct load control. So it's a larger canvas that we have to work with. And we need to think of how do you do it? Do you do it on your own? Does the industry apply definitely? Or do I, as a residential consumer, go to an aggregator and do that? Now, then again, this larger question of what is the role of the DISCOM then? Right? Will the DISCOM by its nature become the aggregator or not? So these are a larger piece of equations that we try to solve in every day. What is highlighted could be what you're really thinking, or you're starting to think in India. How do I see the demand response option moving along? So you have Wi-Fi, you have IoT, you have smartphones, and you have your ultimate device, which is the smart meter. Within these 4 technology enablers, we're calling it technology enablers, you can create a canvas of options which is very distinct. You can do from what you can do from an awareness perspective. You can do what is based on a tariff perspective or time of use based. You can do what is based on consumer taking a call based on an incentive. You can have an automatic DR. You can even have a flexible DR where it's not just about decreasing demand, it's about increasing demand. Now, these are not distinct boxes, okay? You can have a combination of different things with the technology enablers. I had a chance to study a lot of pilots that have happened. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is kind of covers a larger set of things, out of which I wanted to discuss 2 specific cases on demand response that has happened. So this happened in BRPL, that is BSCS Rajdhani in Delhi. I'm glad that I got to be a part of both of these works didn't happen. So the interesting part of both of these targeted residential consumers, which in an urban area, if you see, because the industries are moving to the peripheries, the commercial areas still exist definitely, but residential is an increasing demand that is happening. So what you did is you would provide consumers with home energy reports. You could do it by print, you could provide it by an app, you could provide it online. And then you would see that if this consumer is making a change, the approach for this is you create a competition. You tell the consumer, hey, this is how you are doing, this is how your neighbor is doing, and this is how the best person is doing. Because ultimately from childhood, I think we have conditioned to respond to competition. And how you would do about it and how you would see if the system worked is that you would create a targeted group and you would have a control group. So in the targeted group, you would actually provide the inputs and you would compare it against a control group wherein you don't receive any inputs, and then you see the change. And the large scale trial actually happened in Delhi. So this is a simpler program. This does not take a huge amount of money or effort to run, but it's a very data centric program. So of course, if you have smart meters, you win, because then you can give more data and more more curated data to the consumer. And another thing that as part of USAID program also we are supporting right now is how do you move residential consumers with a rebate. So what you do is you do a gaming system and you say, I will offer you 100 rupees if you reduce your demand during this from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. And you would run these events. So you see in a year, this is what 20 events. This is not 100 events in a year. And you would create a gamification protocol, as in like you are using innovative views ways to design the incentives. Now, the incentives need not be always be money. The incentive could be the ability of a consumer to participate in a lucky draw to win an energy efficient equipment. This could be an energy efficient AC. This could be a electric vehicle. That also you can match it really well. And Tatas have launched it as part of their larger program called Urja Arpan, which is also getting recognized as one of the programs in the under the life mission that government announced, and under the G20, one of the behavioral initiatives that you can do. So that's the whole space of things that we are doing. So we are scaling up right now. You're bringing commercial and industrial consumer. The interesting bit is to see if you can move the commercial and industrial consumers not with money, but with non-monetary benefits. This could be offer of an energy audit, something like that. So that's the whole space in which the game is moving. I'm very cognizant of time. I can talk a lot about this, but I do want to leave time for the discussion. So moving ahead, I want to say, how changes need to be needed. So for that, I'm just going to use the definition, okay? If I take all the DSM regulations that the state has, because ultimately most of them are based on the FOR model regulation, which is based on the Maharashtra regulations. And you talk about initiatives taken by the utility on the consumer side of the meter to bring a desired change. That's the way you are thinking about DSM. You're still thinking on the terms of DSM. Whereas if I read the recent draft grid code that came in 2022, they understood I need demand to manage the grid. So they said, it is what I mean is it's a variation. It's not just reduction. It is variation in electricity usage, manually or automatically, that a consumer can do. And if you see the FERC definition that came out, in which distributed energy resources are also being recognized, you see how it is changing. It's not just about demand load only. It's about how do you use distributed energy resource based on system stability, market prices. You see the way that the thing is changing. It's not just about managing the peak alone. Whereas, where is that we should go? We should actually get into defining flexibility now. We should talk about how flexibility is the ability of a prosumer or a consumer, how he can change from what is his normal behavior in response of a price signal or a market-based incentive. And we are not talking about just the load, we're talking about generation as well as the storage, because that's your canvas. You cannot think in silos anymore, saying rooftop is not my area, so I'll not talk about it. EV is not my area, I'll not talk about it. I'll only talk about cooling. That's the space, the way in which our game is evolving. And you see, as I stand here, last week you saw that, the rights of consumer document amendment came so in June 22, and sorry, I've written July, sorry about that. And you see, they're saying this has to be a norm. So when I did the study and I mapped, so there is some amount of time of use rates, not everywhere, but it is still there. Whereas now this is going to become the norm. They are saying it would be 1.2 times the normal tariff during peak and 1.1 times. You see that being reflected in EV also. You're saying this becomes a common practice with smart meters and all of that. Everybody understand 1.1 times of their electricity tariff, okay? I don't need to create a lecture on it, because if my EV is being supplied as 4 rupees, I know what is the 1.1 of that. If my residential consumption is at 6 rupees, 7 rupees, you know that. But what we don't recognize is what is the larger value for the utility. This is very critical, because when we want to move the needle, you cannot just talk about the consumer tariff or consumer procurement or power procurement. Typically when you say, okay, Maharashtra consumer tariff for residential is 5 rupees. Okay, this is an example. Whereas Maharashtra during that peak time had to buy power from 10 rupees. So the savings is, 10 minus 5 rupees. That is not the simple equation anymore. That's what we have to understand. We have to understand the cost element is coming from different layers, and a lot of things we don't recognize. We don't think about capacity at all. We think about if the peak demand is going to increase continuously, I probably have to add a new power plant. Now, this could be a thermal power plant leading to larger GHG emissions and all of that, or it could be a solar power plant, which could even bring its own, flexibility requirements into the grid. And when I increase power, I also need to think about what is the cost that I am paying for flexibility. This could be thermal or solar also. What is the cost I am paying to get my transformer upgraded? What is the cost I'm paying to add a new line? Because right of way is not a small cost. Right of way is a high cost. And if you take a city like Mumbai or Delhi, the space needed to upgrade and install a transformer is also very expensive. What is the cost of having a huge power transmission line again? And you don't recognize the value of it. You simply think in terms of cost of power as a simple numerical value. And when I translate even the cost of power procurement, which we recognize as very simply, it's not a simple equation. You have to think of where are you sourcing your power from? Am I buying the power from market? Now I have to get into the nitty-gritties of it. Which segment am I buying the power from market? Because if you remember last year when we had a lot of demand increase, the cap, the market prices hit the cap of INR 20 rupees per unit. Then CRC took a call that I want to bring down the cap to 12. And that cap remains. But if you see today, as I talk to you right now, there is a new market segment that is launched called high power dam, in which the limit is as high as 50 rupees. So this gives you the sense of where the power prices could be. And you see this shift happening from the long-term PPA to the market also. Even when you think of long-term PPA, you need to be very cognizant about the fixed cost. The fixed cost that you pay for a power plant, which you are using for very less number of hours to get your peak supply from. What is the cost you are paying to the grid operator for transmission? And what is the cost that you incur for your distribution? What is the cost of renewable purchase obligation and other surcharges and duties and everything that are associated with it? What I wanted to say is, like, when I look at electricity cost, it's not a simple thing. It's a larger game which has larger impacts. You don't even consider, how does carbon market fit into it? How do you value the emission savings? So that's your larger piece that you have to think of. Also think of how do you even save on deviation penalties. So that's becomes a very, very critical piece of it. How can demand side help in capacity issues? So you see, when I want to add more capacity, let's say I want to add more gas turbines, okay? I definitely see the case where you can see I can have demand response in EV charging being cheaper as an option when I compare it with adding a new gas turbine for flexibility. So the idea is, even when you choose capacity option, you give a seat on the table to the demand side also. You don't just talk about batteries. You don't just talk about adding hydro plants. You actually talk about what you could do beyond, and then you make a case for it. This is just an example of a piece of work that we have done. Now, if I read through the regulation, actually the regulators say that you factor in demand when you plan for your resources also. That is happening right now. I cannot stop because this is my favorite area of work on EVs. And how do you actually manage, EV charging? So what is your challenge? Your challenge is, if your EV is charging during your peak time, especially your evening peak time, that is your larger challenge. And then one thing that you would actually try to do is, probably with India specifically, when you have a larger share of solar-based resources coming in, you try to shift your day charging, the charging towards your daytime. Whereas when you have your when you think of it, EV as an advanced resource, as a storage also with vehicle to grid capability also, you're talking about how do I use my EV to solve my evening power problem also. To give you a distinction of how V1G and V2G differs, the thing is that if I have an EV, if I'm just charging it, okay, the amount of time where I can use it as a resource is quite less. Whereas if the EV still remains connected and I continue charging it, I'm not discharging with a deep cycle, I'm discharging with a smaller cycle and using it for ancillaries or whatever, the amount of time that I have to use it as a resource is actually quite higher. And this is how the flexibility fits into the window also. So if you just have time of use, you don't have much, you don't have much flexibility with it. There is not that. People might move, people might not move. Whereas if you get into a smart charging condition where you can, like change the rate of charge for an EV, you go aggregated it at a scale, and then you finally get into the bidirectional charging. That is where you derive a lot of flexibility from EVs. So the idea is that every demand management strategy ideally does not provide you flexibility. It is needed. It is definitely needed, because without time of use, I cannot still build a case of smart charging. So the protocol has to be there. It has to be a portfolio of options. That is definitely there. But the moral here is that that really does not give you a lot of flexibility to go with. I will end in the next couple of minutes. I just wanted to show you a case that we have worked on based on the load curve. See, if you actually have a load curve which actually increases very high during the evening, and then you have EV charging coming in at night, then your strategy has to be a daytime shift. What if we are in a situation where you have evening demand also, and when you have evening demand increasing in a different sort of a way, then your strategy has to change. What I wanted to say is, like, even when you do EV charging, it cannot be a whole India solution. It has to be a part by part state specific solution. What I'm saying is, it depends on the location, it depends on the time, which was the point, if you remember what I started. And you should also ask, what is that the discoms will do here? The discom can actually play the role of aggregator and managing the demand in any case. Like I'm presenting the case for EV, this could be anything. Whereas there could be other players which you can come in, like Sheru, which is working with BSCS right now as an entity. The aggregators can come in as a new player in the distribution side, and they can manage the show. So that's the space we have. And yeah, I'm going to stop here. I had another case, but I think on smart charging, but I think I will stop here in lieu of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bhavna, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So that was very wonderful and very interesting, Chandana. And thank you so much for enlightening us with new concept that was flexible demand. So, like, we Indians are really new to that, but sooner or later it has to be adopted in India. So let me first ask you, like, how are authorities responding to this newer concept? How is their response to this, since you are already working with so many government regulatory electricity regulations? So how is their response to this new concept, and how much are they geared up to go for it?
Okay. So answering you, we see a good positive sense of response when we approach the central regulators. We also see good approach from, a few of the state regulators, but being centrally, because they understand the challenges of managing variable renewables and the need for ancillaries and all of that, we definitely get a positive response. I could quote, S.K. Soni sir as a reference, because he is basically, the embodiment of how the power power grid works in India, and he has a lot of research. And all the conversations that we had with him, he has been insistent saying this is needed, this is needed, of course this is needed, and the time is right. So from that perspective, we do see a lot of traction that is coming up, at the high end, as in people recognize its value. But to get this show going, that's what I said, it's this is not just a technology challenge, it's not just a regulatory challenge. It's about how do you make it a interesting business idea, right? You're talking about a new person who can come in, just like how solar rooftop developers are very common in India right now, how EV charging station providers are very common in India right now, how this new entity can come in called an aggregator, right? And how he can function. So these are very interesting and new areas. And yeah, like it's a good positive response at the top end so far.
So let's hope it is implemented as early as possible. And as coming to this residential consumers, so time of day tariff is really feasible for residential consumers?
So I'm gonna tell you from this perspective, okay? So it's like what actually moves the residential consumer to make a call, okay? I want to make this case also. If your tariff is very low to begin with, let's say it is 4 rupees, and then even if you do a 10% increase, 1.1 times, it is 4.4, right? Is that enough margin to actually make the residential consumer move? Is the question that I am going to ask, definitely. But let me present you with a different case. Right now, we see all over I go, it's a block-based tariff I have for residential. The higher my consumption is, my per unit rate kind of is very higher. Now, imagine a case when I buy a new AC or when I buy an electric vehicle. So in this case, what would happen is I was probably maybe in the 200 unit to 400 unit block, because I have new appliances. Ultimately, even though, my average tariff could be very low, I have arrived at a higher end. And then the time of use actually factors in. And then when I have a reduction, and this reduction is not on what my average tariff, which could still be 4, but this reduction is being translated to me, I have to make the case as in like, oh, I am not in that 400 block anymore, I am still able to stay under the 400 block, and you do that. So it's about how you design the TOU tariff actually. And if I really think about it, it has to be a geographical element is still not coming to it. You cannot have, like, the way it is done is there will be one TOU rate for all of Maharashtra. Will that solve the purpose? Or should A region and B region have different rates? Why I'm making this case is I did a lot of in-depth study on particularly this residential EV problem. And if I see the cases abroad, the residential TOU rate and EV TOU rate are actually complementary in nature. Because what would happen is then I cannot manage my AC demand. If both the TOUs come on the same side, that doesn't happen. It's a tricky problem, but lucky for us, all of these smart meters coming in, all of the AI, ML, all of that actually gives you a better window to design these programs.
That was very logical, Chandana. And now coming to attendees' questions. So Mr. Nageshwar, he has asked to repeat slide number 15. Can we just project it again?
Yeah. Just give me a second. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Hi, Nageshwarji, you are asking about this slide. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Nageshwar, I am enabling you to talk so that you can talk and ask your question if there is any.
Hi, Nageshwarji, what was your question?
Yes, Mr. Nageshwar. I think you can speak now.
Is happening?
No, I think we are not able to hear him, or but there is no input from his side.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hello,
yeah.
can you
Now
hear
we
me now?
can get. Yes,
Yes, Nagesh.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. We
sorry.
can
No,
get.
yeah, actually, I missed this slide, so I want to just hear once again from Chandana. So, can you please repeat this?
So actually, this is from an initiative that is done by Brookings India, which is currently CSEP. Okay, and if you go to the link that I have given, the carbontracker.in, you will be able to see and get all of these graphs in live time. And I think they have been tracking data from 2020. So this is what the All India electricity demand looked like in this rate. So this is from June 18 to June 22nd. I got this graph today only. And as you can see, what it is showing is on this particular June 20th, around 250, this was the demand that India had. That is 214.4 was the demand India had. I think highest demand actually happened on 21st around this time, which was 221. You can see this peak actually happening here. But to illustrate the example, I've used June 20th. And at that period, the thermal power was 142. At that period, the hydropower that was there in the system was 20, almost close to 23. How much gas and nuclear power, this was the scale for it, and how much RE was in the system was close to 44. So all of the units are in megawatts.
Mr. Nageshwar, that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I got it. I mean, it is only for June 20th. So,
Yeah, but
you
you
are
can
explaining only
basically,
for
I
June
just used
20th,
as
right?
an illustrative example. If you go to the Carbon Tracker website, you can change the range. You can get daily summaries. You can get weekly summaries. You can actually use this website to get an understanding. So this is just in this particular condition. When I took the screenshot, my cursor was on top of it. If I move, you will get it. Now it's a static graph. That's why I can't show you. But yeah, but if I were to go to the website, so I can try to do that for you.
Yeah, please.
So it's carbontracker.in, and see, if you go there, you can see it gives you a lot of things, and I can move around. See,
Wow. Oh, nice.
And you can also, you have a lot of like options that you can play with. If you just want to see what is the renewable generation, you can remove all of these options, and you can just see this was the renewable and this was the total peak, right? Okay, Nagashirji, definitely, yeah, you should visit the website and check it out.
Thank you. Very nice to know about this source.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
all right.
Yeah, we will follow that. Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
your
Yeah,
presentation.
that was very much useful. And now, Mr. V.N. Rao, all our content, all our recordings are shared on our LinkedIn page. I have already given the link of this LinkedIn page in the question answer section. And you can visit that, where by maybe in a day or two, this recording will also be uploaded. And there's one more question, I think. Yes. So this question is from Mr. Raghav Agrawal. He says, which large private entity is interested in the above case or already working on being the aggregator?
So in BSES Radhani, actually, we have somebody called Sheru who is working as an aggregator. They're doing V2G pilots, and I think even AC-based aggregator services that are being provided. And it actually, depends on the particular value proposition the discounts see in them and getting their services. So we actually see from a regulatory perspective, I think that's a larger discussion, because the term aggregator, in some sense, there is QCA that is allowed from the renewable management perspective. There is some regulatory precedence and on the distribution sector, because we know it's a regulated business. So of course there is need for much little clarity, but on the pilots and that being done, we actually see this happening. There are other companies like Autogrid, and other companies who actually provide aggregator based, VPPs and other models in other markets. I'm pretty sure they are hoping to start in India. But then again, like, how do you do it? Is it a technology demonstration? That is where some organization like mine comes in, and we actually support a pilot. But yeah, but on the larger page, it is about, how do you create a market for it? That becomes the trickier thing. How do you make it self-sustaining?
Great. I hope, Mr. Raghav, that answers your question. I have also enabled you to talk if you want to ask anything further.
I just wanted to know, like, if there are other companies who are already working on this sector, and since ma'am has already told that just a regulatory base right now, and no private entity has already entered into this part of being an aggregator. So I believe there's also a scope for a private entity who can also make an initiative and get into the aggregator part.
Yeah, definitely, Raghavji. Yes.
Thank you, and that would be all from my side.
Thank you. Yeah. Any further questions? So there are no further questions. And once again, I am want to inform that we are from the next session onwards, we will be giving opportunity to our members to speak about their work. Yeah, just there's somebody has raised a hand. Yeah, let me complete. So we will be giving our members to opportunity so that they can present their work. For that will be a slot of 5 minutes that will be available to them. And also follow our LinkedIn page, which is already given in the question answer section, where you can have more announcements about the award program that is coming up. And this awards will be presented on 16th of December. And we'll keep you informed about all the updates on this program. Okay. So, and for memberships, you can contact me on my WhatsApp number or send us an email on awewesternindia@gmail.com, wherein we can take it further. Even for your certification requirements, you can contact us. Yeah. So this is Mr. Sheikh. So he has raised a hand and I am enabling him to talk. Yes, Mr. Samsher. Yes, Mr. Sheikh. Mr. Sheikh. Mr. Sheikh, you can speak. I have allowed you to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Bhavna, for allowing me to speak.
Yeah.
Though I try to attend, but then most of the time I miss because of some of the other issues.
No
And
problem.
I think you and Milind are doing great job.
Thank
And
you so much.
a big congratulations to today's speaker. I think you have touched a very, 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 very important aspect of energy conservation. And hats off to you. You have addressed quite a few very important aspects of energy conservation, be it in any form. And I think you brought out the 2020 April incident very nicely. I don't have any question. I only have my observation as a practicing energy management professional. Okay. So can I share?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the problem actually started in mid 1970s when the first world energy crisis was felt and DSM was coined. And at that time, it was coined it very wrongly, thinking to be two-dimensional. That technological excellence, increase the efficiency, and administrative commitment so that governments can pump in money and you keep putting on the power plants and increasing the capacity without any kind of concern and consideration for environment. And number two, reserve fossil fuel. And we kept on doing that damage, I think, till 2007-8, when the realization came. And what the speaker was talking again and again, behavior. Again, the problem again happened. Till that time, whatever behavior related was happening, it was based on primarily theory of plant behavior. Theory of plant behavior is like hand holding. I ask you to do something, you do it. So long I tell you, you do it. When I don't tell you, don't do it. Whereas it should have been done on the basis of theory of ABC of B.F. Skinner, which has not happened. Today, people have realized, but it is too late. A lot of studies are being done, and results are encouraging. Unfortunately, in India, nothing much is being done. I think behavioral aspect can play a very, very major role, and we have seen it on April 28th. And if I remember correctly, on that 9 second, the grid impact was 30,089 megawatt. So the public have the power of gifting to the nation directly in millions of megawatt power at the consumer end. And if we go by 1:2 ratio, then it is double than that. And if we see the cascading effects, then it is manifold in every field. And it is very simple. We need to do it. We need to do it in every possible ways. In my own PhD study, I have used ABC theory in air conditioning, and I have got, just by offsetting the set temperature and using the ceiling fan, I have got 20% and above. It did not cost any money. It did not cause any kind of comfort. It is in our hand. All that it requires is just explaining the people what is the right thing to be done and how it should be done. Today we all talk so many things, but then we don't talk what exactly to be told to the people. We have resources. India has the capacity. India has got everything that is required to spread that correct message to the masses. And if it goes, then nothing can stop us to achieve the goal that is being set. It is that easy and simple. I hope and I pray that Ministry of Power, Government of India, and the nodal bodies, they take a leaf out of that April 2020 9 o'clock incident. A lot of papers are written, of course, on that. I also wrote. They take a leaf out of that and implement those in energy conservation, and I think we will see a completely new India. Thank you very much.
Very
Thank you once.
encouraging words. Very encouraging words. Thank you.
Thank
And
you
we
once
also
again.
hope that with with the life mission and everything coming in, wherein behavior is getting a huge push, especially India, particularly paying the G20 presidency this year, we have a role to not just make change in India, but actually globally. And we hope, from this perspective, as not I saving money, but I am doing something for the earth. From that perspective, also, if something can be done, it would be wonderful. Thank you.
Exactly. That is what is required. That what am I doing for my next generation? If I don't ask that question today, and if I don't act, I am going to be responsible directly for my future generation.
Yeah. So we need to bring in that culture, and definitely it will come. Now, Mr. Raghav Agrawal also has something to say. So can you quickly, because we are already crossed the time. So Mr. Raghav, can you speak up?
Yeah. I'm sorry for taking a little more time, but I'm going to touch the base again about the aggregator part. I had just one small query. Like when we talk about being an aggregator in India, I see we have two perspectives to deal with. One is the expectation of the government, and one is the expectation of the consumer. So how do we differentiate? Like, what is the ultimate goal as an aggregator one should have to satisfy both levels? One of the government, of course, and one of the consumer as well. I think it has to be on a balanced side for both, na?
Understood. I guess it's about how we say in the sector that I work in, creating win-win-win situation, right? So it's like
Absolutely.
the business has to win, the government has to win, and the consumer has to win. To give you an example, perhaps let's say, the way this is working, we all park our vehicles when we take our metro or a train or something like that, right? And typically a lot of us commute to our offices, we park our vehicle at one metro station or train station, and we go and then we come back. Imagine having this vehicle there and you actually use it as a grid resource to store excess solar, to actually manage the show at the railway station. And what does the consumer get the benefit out of it? It need not be that I get the benefit of cheaper electricity rate. What we don't recognize is, even if you reduce my parking fee, which I have to pay anyway, right, that would also give my case, build my case there. Basically, sometimes what I feel is when we build our scenario, we box ourselves in and thinking, this is the only lateral way to think the solution about. We don't really think innovatively in the way a business model can be designed and what it can be done. Particularly, I said the case of EV as an aggregator based example because this is smart, this is coming right now. This is a space where you have a CPO, and the play is quite easier there than getting into an aggregator of, let's say, a cooling based services, right? So the idea is to not to reinvent any wheel or not to make a lot of changes, but actually bring innovative solutions. And how do you actually manage it? So one of the examples I actually wanted to discuss here, which I didn't have time for, is to how to solve this parking EV problem, right, at a building. And instead of creating 10 charging stations, you could just put one box for 100 and try to provide manage demand for a lot of vehicles. This could be 10, this could be 20 also. I guess that's the ability that technology can actually provide us with minimal investment. I also want to correlate this into India's bus charging problem, which I'm very vocal about. Okay, the way this is happening in India right now, you kind of treat a bus like a mobile phone. It's like, oh, if I have a bus, I have to have a charger. But it is about a depot having 50 buses. So do you need 50 chargers for the bus, or do you need to create a master charger which can charge your buses when it is there, but it can also charge other vehicles which are there? Then you have to think of, where do you place the charger from that perspective. So what I wanted to say is, like, it's mostly when I get into this ecosystem, it's about this, how do you bring in systemic innovation in the way things are designed. And particularly, sir, I do want to refer to one publication which has came couple of days only. There is an IRENA publication which talks about 100 of these systemic innovations. I was happy to be a minor part of the power to mobility piece, but there are larger pieces on it. They also talk about power to heat and cooling and power to green hydrogen, and how all of these innovations can come into this picture. But very valid point, and that's the only way that I can respond at this point.
Thank you, Chandana. So it was really very interesting for all of us, and that can be known from the interaction that we had after the session. And like, if you have more questions, you can send us and we can forward it to Chandana. And
Yeah, I just want to say it's that I cannot, sit on today and say that I have solved all the problems. That's not the way. I guess this is a particular kind of a problem you cannot solve without collaboration. You cannot solve without, innovation. You cannot actually solve without bringing people together. So that's the fun part of the puzzle for me, because it's not a technological challenge at all. It's a people challenge, it's a money challenge. So I'm very glad that you gave me an opportunity to have a talk, but I hope there can be continued engagement and collaboration on the piece of the puzzle that we have.
Sure. So good that this platform will give you more interactions and more insights. I mean, with the people interacting. And so thank you once again for being a speaker for today. And we hope that you continue to be associated with us in future also. And thank you all the participants for attending this session and being connected to us throughout this 6 months. And we hope for more interactions in future. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.